10. Warren Nutter. Warren Nutter served 65 years, 10 months, and 6 days in prison. At the age of 18, he was sentenced to death for the murder of a patrolman during a gas station robbery in Iowa. However, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in 1957. Nutter spent decades behind bars before his release and died in 2021 at the age of 86, making his prison term one of the longest in U.S. history. 9. Kenneth Nicely. Kenneth Nicely served 65 years, 362 days in prison, making him the longest-serving inmate in Arkansas. He was convicted of the murder of a police officer and has been incarcerated since 1958. As of now, he is still serving his sentence, and his case is one of the most notable for its length in the state's history. 8. Sammy Robinson. Sammy Robinson spent 66 years, 85 days in prison. He was sentenced at the age of 17 for a crime in Louisiana and spent most of his life behind bars. Robinson was convicted of a series of robberies and murders. He served a significant portion of his life sentence, ultimately dying in prison at the age of 83. His case stands out for the length of time he served before his death. 7. Johnson Van Dyke Grigsby. Johnson Van Dyke Grigsby served 66 years, 123 days in prison. He was convicted of murder after killing a man during a fight and was sentenced to life in prison. Grigsby was denied parole 69 times throughout his sentence. At the age of 89, he was eventually released. After facing difficulties adjusting to life outside of prison, he voluntarily returned to prison for a brief period before being released again in 1976. 6. Joseph Ligon. Joseph Ligon served 67 years, 54 days in prison. He was sentenced to life without parole at the age of 15 for his involvement in a 1953 murder in Philadelphia. Despite being offered resentencing and parole opportunities in 2016 and 2017, Ligon rejected them. He chose to remain in prison, making a powerful statement about his beliefs and sense of responsibility. Ligon was released from prison on February 11, 2021, at the age of 83, after spending more than 6 decades behind bars. 5. John Phillips spent 68 years, 236 days in prison. Convicted of *Zuli assaulting a 5-year-old girl, he was released on parole on March 9, 2021, with his parole set to end on March 8, 2026. 4. Paul Geidel Jr. Paul Geidel Jr. served 68 years, 245 days in prison. He was sentenced at the age of 17 in 1911 for the robbery and murder of a man in New York. In 1926, he was found to be insane and was transferred to a mental hospital. He remained in institutional care until his release in 1980 at the age of 86. Geidel's case is notable for the extraordinary length of his sentence, spanning across decades, and his eventual release in his later years, after spending much of his life in confinement. He died in 1989 at the age of 93. 3. Walter H. Spork Jr. Walter H. Spork Jr. has served 69 years, 8 days in prison. He was sentenced to 99 years and 6 months for the axe murder of a 4-year-old girl, which he committed when he was 17 years old. Spork is still incarcerated today, making his sentence one of the longest currently being served. His case stands out due to the brutality of the crime and the length of time he has spent in prison since his conviction. 2. Francis Clifford Smith. Francis Clifford Smith served 70 years, 31 days in prison. He was sentenced to death in 1949 for the murder of a guard during a yacht club robbery. However, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in 1954, just 2 hours before his execution. Smith spent decades in prison before being paroled in July 2020, making his sentence one of the longest ever served in U.S. history. His case is notable for the dramatic shift in his sentence and his eventual release after more than 70 years behind bars. 1. Charles Fusid. Charles Fusid spent 70 years, 303 days in prison, most of his life in a mental asylum in Ararat, Victoria, after he was convicted of murdering an elderly man and stealing his boots. His crime occurred in 1910 when he was a young man. He was placed in the mental asylum due to his mental state, spending decades there. Fusid died at around 91 or 92 years old in the asylum, making his sentence one of the longest in history.